The crystal glasses clinked together over the mahogany dining table. Harrison Whitmore, Harry, to those close to him, raised his glass higher than the others. His smile the widest among the four seated at the table. "To my little girl," he said, his voice steady yet filled with unmistakable pride. "No matter what you do, you always manage to exceed my expectations." Celeste Whitmore, 27 and glowing, dipped her head slightly at her father's words. Her engagement ring caught the light from the chandelier above them, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the white tablecloth. "Thank you, Dad," she said, meeting his gaze briefly before turning to her mother. "And Mom, for making this dinner special on such short notice." Delilah Whitmore nodded, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting the pearls at her neck. "Of course, darling, though I wish you'd given us more than a day's notice." Harry shot his wife a look. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we're celebrating." Paxton Whitmore, their 24-year-old son, slouched in his chair, typing something on his phone. "Yeah, congrats, sis. Adrian's a cool guy. Put that away," Harry said, gesturing to Paxton's phone. "Your sister just announced her engagement. Show some respect." Paxton rolled his eyes, but slipped his phone into his pocket. Harry turned back to Celeste, excitement bubbling inside him. "So have you set a date yet? Where are you thinking?" "The Hamilton Hotel downtown has that beautiful ballroom. I know the owner, Gary. I can make a call." Celeste exchanged a quick glance with her mother. "Actually, we're thinking of the Rose Garden estate. Adrian's parents suggested it." "The Rose Garden? Bit pretentious, isn't it?" Harry said, wrinkling his nose. "Wouldn't you prefer something more meaningful? What about the beach house in Newport? That's where your mother and I got married." Delilah's smile tightened. "Harry, that was over 30 years ago. Things are different now. The Rose Garden is where all the notable families have their events." Harry took a slow sip of his wine. "And we're not notable, Dad," Celeste cut in. "Adrian's family has connections there. They've already spoken to the event coordinator." Without consulting us, Harry asked, his eyebrows rising. "They were just being helpful," Celeste said, her tone defensive. "Plus, they know people. It's hard to get a slot there without connections." Harry laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "And what am I? I built my company from the ground up. I know half the business owners in this city." "If you want connections, Celeste, you have them right here." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Delilah cleared her throat. "Let's not get caught up in details. We should be celebrating," she said, raising her glass again. "To Celeste and Adrian." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and strange smiles. Harry tried to engage Celeste in wedding plans, offering to handle the financial aspects, suggesting venues, photographers, caterers, but each suggestion was met with a polite but dismissive response. "Dad, Adrian's parents know what they're doing. They're handling most of it." Celeste finally said his dessert was being served. "You don't need to worry about anything." Harry sat back in his chair, feeling a strange unease settle in his stomach. "I'm your father. It's my job to worry. And to help." Celeste reached across the table and patted his hand. "I know, Dad, but really everything's under control. To show up and enjoy the day." Harry nodded, forcing a smile, but the unease remained. The following days were a whirlwind of calls from Delilah to her side of the family. Excited chatter between Celeste and her friends and meetings with Adrian's parents that Harry was conspicuously not invited to. Each time he asked about the plans, he was told they were still being worked out, where that Adrian's mother is handling that part. After a week of being kept at arm's length from his daughter's wedding preparations, Harry decided to take matters into his own hands. He called Adrian's father, Robert Jenkins, a man he'd met only twice and found insufferably pompous. "Robert, Harry Whitmore here. I was hoping we could discuss some of the wedding arrangements." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, Harry?" "Yes, well, most of the arrangement have been finalized." "Finalized? Without my input?" Another pause. "We were under the impression that Delilah was representing your interests in the matter." Harry gripped the phone tighter. "I'd like to be involved directly. It's my daughter's wedding." Of course," Robert said, his tone placating. "However, the truth is, we're trying to keep the guest list rather selective. The Rose Garden has limited capacity. You understand. I'm not talking about the guest list," Harry said, his patience wearing thin. "I'm talking about being involved in the planning of my daughter's wedding." "I see. Well, perhaps you should discuss this with Celeste. I believe she and Adrian have some specific ideas about how they want things to proceed." After ending the call, Harry immediately dialed Celeste. "Dad," she answered, sounding distracted. "I'm actually about to head into a meeting. Can I call you back?" "Celeste, I need to talk to you about the wedding. I just spoke with Robert Jenkins and he seemed to think I'm not involved in the planning." Silence stretched across the line. "Celeste, Dad, we should talk about this in person. Can you come over for dinner tomorrow?" "Mom will be there too." The next evening, Harry arrived at Celeste's downtown apartment, a place he had helped her purchase 3 years ago. Delilah was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. Paxton, surprisingly, was also present, slouched in an armchair, looking bored. "What's going on?" Harry asked, taking in the serious faces around him. Celeste gestured for him to sit. "Dad, there's something we need to discuss." Harry remained standing. "I gather that much. What is it?" Celeste glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "We've been talking about the wedding, and the thing is, we think it might be best if you weren't there." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. "What?" "It's not that we don't want you there," Celeste hurried to add. "It's just that Adrian's family is very traditional. They're concerned about, well, tensions. Harry repeated, his voice growing louder. "What tensions?" Delilah stood up, placing a hand on his arm. "Harry, please calm down. This is exactly the kind of reaction we were worried about." Harry shook her hand off. "You were in on this decision." "It wasn't an easy one to make," Delilah said, her voice smooth and practiced. "But Adrian's family is very influential and they have certain expectations about the kind of event this will be." "I don't fit those expectations," Harry asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Dad, you have to understand." Celeste began, her voice trembling slightly. "Adrian's family comes from a different world. They're old money and they have certain standards." "Standards," Harry repeated, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. "And I don't meet these standards. I, who built a Fortune 500 company from nothing, who provided everything you've ever had." "It's not about money," Celeste said, frustration creeping in her voice. "It's about fit. You can be so stubborn, so controlling. You always want things your way." "Controlling?" Harry echoed, incredulous. "Is that what this is about? You think I'll try to control your wedding? You're doing it right now." Celeste exclaimed, "You're making this about you when it should be about what's best for me and Adrian. And what's best is excluding your father from one of the most important days of your life." Harry's voice rose. "Stop overreacting." "Dad," Paxton interjected, finally looking up from his phone. "It's just a wedding." Harry turned to his son. Disbelief etched on his face. "Just a wedding? Is that what you think? That this is about a single day? This is about respect. Paxton, this is about family." "This is exactly why we made this decision," Delilah said, her voice cold. "You always blow things out of proportion. You make everything into a drama." Harry looked from face to face, his wife, his daughter, his son, and saw nothing but dismissal in their eyes. The realization cut deep. They had made this decision together, united against him. "I see," he said, finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Well, thank you for your honesty, at least." He turned to leave, his hand on the doorknob when Celeste called after him. "Dad, please try to understand. It's just easier this way." Harry didn't turn around. Easier for whom, Celeste? Certainly not for me. He walked out, the door closing behind him with a quiet, definitive click. Harry sat in a study, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk beside him. The house was quiet. Delilah hadn't returned home yet. He stared the framed photo on his desk, a family portrait taken 10 years ago. Celeste, 17 then, stood tall and proud next to him. Paxton, 14, wore a mischievous grin. Delilah, elegant as always, stood slightly apart, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Looking at it now, Harry could see the distance already forming, the invisible lines being drawn. The grandfather clock in a hall struck midnight, the sound echoing through the empty house. Harry closed his eyes, memories washing over him like waves point 20 years earlier. The Whitmore family was just beginning to taste success. Harry had secured his first major contract, a deal that would put Whitmore Enterprises on the map. He'd come home late that night, excitement coursing through him. "Delilah," he called out, rushing into the living room where his wife sat reading a magazine. "We got it. The Palmer contract is ours." Delilah had looked up, her expression mild. "That's nice, dear. Dinner's in the fridge. You'll need to heat it up." "Did you hear what I said? The Palmer contract." This changes everything for us. I heard you, Delilah had replied, turning a page in her magazine. I'm glad it worked out. Harry had stood there, his excitement deflating like a puncture balloon. This means we can finally move to a bigger house. Get you that car you've been wanting. Delilah had sighed, setting her magazine down. Harry, my parents offered to help us with those things months ago. We didn't need to wait for this contract. I don't want your parents' money, Harry had said, his jaw tightening. We can make on our own. On your terms, you mean, Delilah had retorted. Always on your terms. That night had set the tone for the years that followed. Harry worked longer hours, pushing himself harder, determined to build something substantial, something that was entirely his own. Delilah retreated further into her family's world, taking the children with her to country club lunches and society events while Harry was at the office. By the time Celeste was 10 and Paxton 7. The division in the household was clear. Delilah's family, the prestigious Matthews clan, had enveloped the children in their world of privilege and entitlement. Weekend trips to the Matthews Lake House, summer vacations with Delilah's siblings and their children, private schools chosen by Delilah's father. Harry had fought against it all, but he'd been outnumbered. They need structure, discipline. Harry had argued one night after discovering Paxton had been caught cheating on a test. They need to understand the value of hard work. Their children, Harry, Delilah had countered. They need to enjoy their childhood. Not everyone had a struggle like you did. The words had stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were accurate. Harry had grown up with nothing, fighting for every opportunity. He'd wanted his children to have more than he had, but not at the cost of their character. They asked. The years passed. Harry watched his children grow more distant, more dismissive of his values. Celeste, once his little shadow who would follow him around his home office asking questions about business, became a teenager who rolled her eyes at his advice. Paxton, who had once begged Harry to teach him to throw a baseball, now barely acknowledged him at dinner. The memory that haunted Harry most, however, was from Celeste's high school graduation. He'd arranged to take the day off, a rare occurrence, only to find out the ceremony had been moved up by 2 hours without anyone informing him. By the time he arrived, breathless and apologetic, it was over. He'd found his family outside, taking photos with Delilah's parents. Where were you? Celeste had demanded, tears in her eyes. The ceremony was at 1, not 3, Harry had explained, confused. That's what was on the invitation. I told Mom last week they changed the time. Celeste had said, her voice breaking. She was supposed to tell you. Harry had turned to Delilah, who had the grace to look embarrassed. It slipped my mind, she'd said. You're always so busy. I didn't think you'd be able to make it anyway. The hurt in Celeste's eyes that day had been genuine. But over time, that hurt had calcified into something harder, something that aligned more with Delilah's casual dismissal of Harry's place in the family. Now, sitting in his study, Harry could trace the path that had led to this moment, his daughter telling him he wasn't welcome at her wedding. It hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow erosion, a gradual pushing aside until he'd become an outsider in his own family. The sound of the front door opening broke through his thoughts. Delilah's steps, light and measured, moved through the foyer. She paused outside his study door, but didn't enter. After a moment, her footsteps continued up the stairs. Harry picked up his untouched whiskey and downed in one go. The burners throwed a welcome distraction from the ache in his chest. 3 days passed. Harry and Delilah moved around each other like ghosts, not speaking, barely acknowledging each other's presence. Harry threw himself into work, leaving early and returning late. If Delilah noticed, she didn't comment that on the 4th day, Harry arrived home to find an envelope on the console table in the foyer. It was thick, expensive cream-colored paper with his name written in elegant calligraphy. He recognized it immediately for what it was: a wedding invitation. For a moment, hope flickered in his chest. Perhaps they had reconsidered. Perhaps Celeste had come to her senses. He tore open the envelope carefully and pulled out the card inside. The words blurred before his eyes as he read, "Mr. and Mrs. Robert Jenkins request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Adrian Michael Jenkins, to Celeste Victoria Whitmore." Harry stared at the invitation, reading it once, twice, 3 times. His name wasn't listed among the parents of the bride, just Celeste Victoria Whitmore, as if she had sprung into existence on her own. And the invitation itself, addressed to Mr. Harrison Whitmore, had been sent by Adrian's parents, not his own daughter. He was being invited as a guest, a generic guest to his own daughter's wedding. The final insult. Harry placed the invitation back on the table with deliberate care, his movement slow and controlled despite the rage building inside him. He climbed the stairs to their bedroom where Delilah was sitting at her vanity removing her jewelry. "I received an invitation today," he said, his voice deceptively calm that Delilah's eyes met his in the mirror. "Yes, I saw it when I came home. Did you know about this?" She turned to face him. "About what specifically, Harry?" "About me being invited as a guest to my daughter's wedding, about my name being left off the invitation entirely, about this entire charade." Delilah sighed, setting down her earrings. "It was Adrian's parents' decision. They're paying for everything. So they had the final say on the invitations. And you didn't think to object, to stand up for me. What was I supposed to say? They've been generous enough to include you at all given the circumstances." Harry stared at her, truly seeing her for perhaps the first time in years. This woman who had shared his life for 3 decades, who had borne his children, who had witnessed his struggles and successes. She didn't respect him. Worse, she didn't value him. "I see," he said finally. "Well, then I guess I should be grateful for the invitation." He turned and walked back downstairs to his study, locking the door behind him. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and began to type. Within an hour, he had booked a flight to Italy, departing the day before the wedding, and arranged for a 2-week stay at a luxury villa in Tuscany. He made one more call that night to his assistant. "Margaret, I need you to clear my schedule for the last 2 weeks of June. I'll be out of the country." After a pause, he added, "And I'll be unreachable." "Unreachable, sir? But the Peterson merger can wait." Harry interrupted. "Where you can pass it to James. He's ready to take on more responsibility." "Yes, sir? Well, Mrs. Whitmore be joining you." Harry's grip on the phone tightened. "No, Margaret, she will not." The following morning, Harry left the house before Delilah woke up. He spent the day at his office, methodically reorganizing his schedule, delegating tasks, preparing for his absence. He didn't return home until late that night, knowing Delilah would be asleep. This pattern continued for the next few weeks. Harry avoided all contact with his family, ignoring calls from Celeste and Paxton, speaking to Delilah only when absolutely necessary. If they noticed his coldness, his distance, they didn't comment on it. Perhaps they were relieved. The day before his scheduled departure, Harry received a text message from Celeste. "Dad, we need to finalize the seating arrangements for the reception. Are you bringing a +1? Harry stared at the message for a long time before typing his response. "No, I won't be needing a seat at all." He turned off his phone after that, packed his bags, and slept in the guest room. The next morning, he left for the airport before dawn. He didn't leave a note. The Italian sun warmed Harry's face as he sat on the terrace of his rented villa, a glass of local wine in hand. The rolling hills of Tuscany stretched out before him, vineyards and olive groves creating a patchwork of greens and golds. It was beautiful, peaceful. Everything his life back home was not. For 2 weeks, Harry had been completely cut off from his regular life. He'd left his phone in his hotel room, spent his days exploring small villages, visiting local wineries, and his evenings dining alone in cozy restaurants where no one knew his name or expected anything from him. It had been in many ways a revelation. The constant knot of tension he'd carried in his shoulders for years had begun to loosen. The tight feeling in his chest when he thought about his family had dulled to a manageable ache. He'd even managed to sleep through the night, something that had become increasingly rare at home. But today was his last day in Italy. Tomorrow he would board a plane back to reality, back to the mess he'd left behind, back to a family that didn't want him. Harry sipped his wine, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. He wasn't looking forward to the return. But he wasn't dreading it either. Something had shifted during his time away. The hurt was still there, but it was accompanied now by a new feeling, a cold, clear certainty. His family had made their choice. Now is time for him to make his. The flight back was long, but uneventful. Harry spent most of it reviewing business proposals, preparing himself to dive back into work as soon as he landed. He called Margaret from the airport in Rome, giving her a list of meetings to arrange for the coming week. She hadn't mentioned his family, and he hadn't asked. When he finally arrived home, the house was quiet. It was mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. Delilah was probably at her weekly lunch with her sister. Harry carried his luggage upstairs, unpacked methodically, and was back downstairs in a study by the time he heard the front door open. Harry, Delilah's voice called from the foyer, surprise evident in her tone. "Are you home?" Harry didn't answer, continuing to sort through the mail Margaret had left on his desk. Footsteps approached, and then Delilah was standing in the doorway, looking at him as if he were a ghost. "You're back," she said, stating the obvious. "I am," Harry replied, not looking up from his task. "Where were you?" There was an edge to her voice now. "You missed the wedding, Harry? Do you have any idea what that did to Celeste?" At this, Harry finally raised his head. "I was in Italy. And yes, I'm aware I missed the wedding. That was rather the point." Delilah stepped into the study, her face flushed with anger. "How could you be so selfish? So petty? It was your daughter's wedding day. And you disappeared without a word." "Without a word," Harry repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "I believe I made it quite clear I wouldn't be attending when I responded to Celeste's text. And I find it interesting that neither of you bothered to check on me until the day of the wedding, almost as if you didn't care whether I was there or not until my absence became inconvenient. Delilah hissed. "It was humiliating. Everyone was asking where you were. Were we supposed to say that you were throwing a tantrum because you didn't get your way?" Harry leaned back in his chair, regarding his wife with cool detachment. "You could have told the truth that I wasn't welcome, that I was invited as an afterthought, a generic guest rather than the father of the bride, that my own family decided I wasn't important enough to include in one of the most significant days of my daughter's life. That's not true. And you know it," Delilah protested, but there was a flicker of guilt in her eyes. "You were always welcome. You chose not to come." "Spare me the revisionist history, Delilah," Harry said, turning back to his mail. "I'm not interested." Delilah stood there for a moment longer, clearly expecting more. But Harry had said all he intended to say. Finally, she turned and left, her steps heavy on the hardwood floors. To be why the time Harry emerged from his study hours later, the house was silent again. A note on the kitchen counter informed him that Delilah was having dinner with Celeste and would be back late. Harry made himself a sandwich, ate it standing by the counter, and then returned to his study. This pattern continued for the next few days. Harry and Delilah orbiting each other's lives but never connecting. Harry threw himself into work, leaving early and returning late. Delilah filled her days with social engagements, charity committee meetings, lunches with friends, all the activities that had defined her life for years. On the fourth day after his return, Harry's phone rang as he was leaving his office. It was Celeste. For a moment he considered not answering. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the lingering remnants of paternal obligation, made him pick up. "Celeste," he said, his voice neutral. "Dad," she responded, and Harry could hear the barely contained fury in her voice. "We need to talk." "Do we?" "Yes, we do. You embarrassed me, humiliated me on the most important day of my life. How could you do that?" Harry closed his eyes, pain lancing through him at her words. The most important day of her life, and she hadn't wanted him there. "I believe I made it clear I wouldn't be attending." "You were invited," Celeste exclaimed. "You got an invitation and then you just disappeared. Do you know what people were saying? That you didn't approve of the marriage, that you and Mom were having problems, that you were too busy with work to attend your own daughter's wedding." "And which version did you prefer?" Harry asked, his voice soft but cutting. "Which law was most convenient for you?" "That's not fair," Celeste protested. "You put me in an impossible position." "I put you in an impossible position," Harry repeated, incredulity coloring his voice. "You excluded me from your wedding. You allowed your fiancé's parents to send me a generic invitation, as if I were some distant acquaintance. You made it abundantly clear that my presence was neither required nor desired. And yet somehow, I put you in an impossible position." "It wasn't like that," Celeste insisted, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "You're twisting everything." "I don't think I am," Harry said. "But it doesn't matter now. The wedding is over. You're married. Life goes on. So that's it. You're just going to act like nothing happened." "No," Harry said, his tone hardening. "I'm going to act like everything happened. Every slight, every dismissal, every time you and your mother and your brother made me feel unwelcome in my own family. I'm going to remember it all, Celeste. And I'm going to respond accordingly." There was a pause. And then Celeste's voice came back, smaller now. What does that mean? It means goodbye. Celeste, Harry said, and ended the call. He sat in his car for a long time afterward, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of the decision he'd just made. Then he started the engine and drove home. The next morning, his phone rang again. This time it was Paxton. "Dad," his son said without preamble. "What did you say to Celeste? She was crying all night." "Hello to you too, Paxton," Harry replied dryly. "I'm fine. Thank you for asking. This isn't a joke," Paxton snapped. "You need to apologize to Celeste. She's upset enough as it is. First, you skip her wedding. And now you're giving her some kind of cryptic threat." "It wasn't a threat," Harry said calmly. "It was a statement of fact. And I find it interesting that you're calling to defend your sister when you yourself haven't bothered to check on me once since I returned from Italy. Why would I need to check on you? You're an adult. You make your own choices." "Yes, I do. As did you and Celeste when you decided to side with your mother against me." Paxton sighed, the sound crackling over the line. "Dad, just get over already. It was just a wedding. Why are you making such a big deal about this?" "It wasn't just a wedding, Paxton. It was a symbol of something much larger, something that's been happening for years. But I don't expect you to understand that." Whatever Paxton said, dismissal clear in his voice. "Just call Celeste and apologize. She doesn't need the stress right now." "No," Harry said simply. "No," Paxton repeated, disbelief evident in his voice. "What do you mean?" No, Paxton, I will not be calling Celeste to apologize. I have nothing to apologize for." "You're unbelievable," Paxton muttered. "Fine. Have it your way. But don't come crying to us when you realize what you've lost." The line went dead. Harry stared at his phone for a moment, then placed it back on his desk. What he'd lost? He'd lost it long ago. He just hadn't realized it until now. Don't be why the time Harry arrived home that evening. His phone had accumulated a dozen missed calls and twice as many text messages. All from Delilah. He ignored them all, pulling into the garage and entering the house with a sense of weary resignation. He could hear Delilah's voice coming from the kitchen, sharp and agitated. "Don't understand how he could be so cruel," she was saying as Harry approached. "Celeste is devastated. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you encouraged her to exclude me from the wedding." Harry said from the doorway. Delilah whirled around, her face flushed. She was holding her phone and Harry realized she'd been on a call. "I'll call you back," she said quickly and into the call. Then to Harry, "You had no right to speak to Celeste that way. And you had no right to turn my children against me." Harry replied evenly. "Yet here we are. Turn them against you." Delilah repeated, incredulous. "I've spent years making excuses for you, Harry. Years telling them that you love them even when you're too busy to show it. Years smoothing over the hurt feelings and disappointments when you missed another school play, another game, another important moment in their lives because you were too obsessed with your precious company." Harry leaned against the doorframe, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "Is that what you've been doing? Making excuses for me? How generous of you. Tell me, Delilah, did you also make excuses for me when you convinced Celeste it would be better if I didn't attend her wedding? Did you tell her how controlling I am? How difficult? How embarrassing?" Delilah's expression flickered. A momentary flash of guilt that confirmed Harry's suspicions more clearly than any confession could have. "That's what I thought," Harry said quietly. "You have no idea what I said to Celeste," Delilah protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I think I do," Harry said. "I think you did the same thing you've been doing for years, painting me as the villain so you could be the hero, making me the bad guy so you could be the good guy. It's a neat trick, Delilah, but it stops now." "What does that mean?" Delilah asked, echoing Celeste's question from earlier. "It means I'm done," Harry said, pushing away from the doorframe. "Done being the outsider in my own family, done trying to earn the respect of people who have no intention of giving it, done with all of it." He turned to leave, but Delilah's voice stopped him. "What are you saying, Harry? Are you leaving me?" Harry looked back at her, at this woman he'd spent most of his life with, and felt nothing. No anger. No hurt. No love. Just emptiness. "No, Delilah," he said. "I'm not leaving. Not yet. But things are going to change, and you're not going to like it." As he walked away, Harry felt a strange sense of lightness. The path ahead was clear now. No more confusion, no more doubt, no more hoping for a change that would never come. Just clarity and purpose. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another message from Celeste or Paxton, no doubt. He ignored it, continuing up the stairs to the guest room where he'd been sleeping since his return. Tomorrow, he would begin to implement his plan. The lobby of Stokes and Partners law firm gleamed with marble and polished wood. Harry sat in one of the leather armchairs, waiting for his appointment. He'd been Randall Stokes' client for over 20 years, trusting the man with both personal and business legal matters. Mr. Whitmore, a young receptionist called. Mr. Stokes will see you now. Harry followed her down a corridor to a corner office where Randall Stokes, a man in his mid-60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, rose to greet him. Harry, Randall said warmly, shaking his hand. Good to see you. Though I must admit your request for an urgent meeting had me intrigued. Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice. Randall, Harry replied, taking a seat across from the lawyer's desk. Of course. Now, what can I help you with today? Harry placed his briefcase on his lap, opening it and removing a folder. I need to make some changes to my will and various other financial arrangements. Randall's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. What kind of changes are we talking about? Substantial ones, Harry said, sliding the folder across the desk. I want to remove my children as beneficiaries entirely. Randall sat back in his chair, surprise evident on his face. That's a significant change, Harry. May I ask what prompted this decision? Harry's expression remained impassive. Let's just say I've had a wake-up call regarding where I stand with my family. Randall nodded slowly, not pressing for details. It was one of the things Harry appreciated about the man, his discretion. And Mrs. Whitmore, will she remain a beneficiary? For now, yes, Harry said, though I'd like to restructure things to limit her access to certain assets. I see, Randall said again, opening the folder and scanning its contents, and you're planning to redirect the bulk of your estate to charitable organizations. Yes, the Harrison Whitmore Foundation specifically. I'll be establishing it to support entrepreneurship programs for underprivileged youth. Randall looked up from the papers. Harry, I have to ask, are you sure about this? This represents a complete reversal of your estate planning up to this point. Harry met the lawyer's gaze steadily. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Randall. After a moment, Randall nodded. Very well, I'll need to draft new documents, which will take a few days. In the meantime, I'd suggest you start the process of establishing the foundation. I could put you in touch with colleagues who specialize in that area. Thank you. Harry said, there's one more thing. I'd like to review all joint accounts and assets I share with Delilah. I'm interested in reallocating some of those resources. You're thinking of moving assets? Randall asked carefully, not moving them exactly, Harry clarified, just ensuring they're protected should the need arise. Randall's expression turned grave. Harry, I have to advise you that if you're considering divorce, I didn't say anything about divorce. Harry interrupted smoothly. I'm simply being prudent. Of course, Randall said, though his eyes remained skeptical. I'll have my team review your financial structures and provide some options. But I must caution you against making any drastic moves with joint assets without proper legal groundwork. That could complicate matters significantly later on. Noted, Harry said, standing. I'll wait for your call about the world changes. As Harry left the law firm, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The first blow had been struck. Not that his family would know it, yet these changes would remain private for now. But the foundation had been laid. Over the next few weeks, Harry worked methodically. During the day, he maintained his usual routine at Whitmore Enterprises, giving no indication that anything had changed. In the evenings and on weekends, he executed his plan step by methodical step that he established the Harrison Whitmore Foundation, transferring a significant initial endowment from his personal funds. He restructured his investment portfolio, moving assets that had been earmarked for Celeste and Paxton into separate accounts under the foundation's name. He consulted with financial advisors about offshore accounts and trusts, following their recommendations with meticulous attention to detail to a T-home. Things remained tense. Delilah had made several attempts to discuss the situation with their children. But Harry had rebuffed each one with cool politeness. There's nothing to discuss, he would say. They've made their feelings clear, as have I. Delilah watched him with growing unease. The distant, distracted husband she had grown accustomed to had been replaced by someone colder, more deliberate, someone who looked at her as if she were a stranger. 2 weeks after his meeting with Randall, Harry returned home to find Delilah waiting for him in the living room. A glass of wine in hand and a determined expression on her face. We need to talk, Harry, she said as he entered. This can't go on. Harry set down his briefcase and loosened his tie. What can't go on exactly? This, whatever this is, Delilah gestured vaguely between them. You've barely said 10 words to me in the past 2 weeks. You're sleeping in the guest room. You won't take calls from the children. It's like living with a ghost. I thought you would appreciate the peace and quiet, Harry said, pouring himself a whiskey from the bar card. Isn't that what you always wanted? For me to stop making a fuss? Stop overreacting. Don't twist my words. Delilah snapped. I never wanted this. Whatever's happening with you. Harry took a sip of his drink, regarding his wife over the rim of the glass. What's happening with me is simple, Delilah. I'm finally seeing things clearly. I'm finally accepting the reality of our family dynamic. And what reality is that Delilah challenged that I'm an outsider, that I always have been, that you, Celeste and Paxton, have your own little club. And I've never been a member. Harry's voice was calm, matter of fact. It was my fault, really. I spent so many years trying to provide for you all, trying to build something meaningful, that I didn't notice when you started building walls to keep me out. That's not true, Delilah protested. You built those walls yourself, Harry, with your constant working, your obsession with success, your rigid expectations. Perhaps Harry conceded, but you were all too happy to shelter behind them. Weren't you to use them as an excuse to exclude me, to dismiss me, to treat me as if my feelings, my place in this family, were inconsequential? That's not fair, Delilah said, her voice rising. Isn't it? Harry asked. Tell me, Delilah, when Celeste was making her wedding plans, did you ever once stand up for me? Did you ever say, no, Harry is Celeste's father, he deserves to be part of this? Or did you go along with it? Encourage it even because it was easier that way? Delilah's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Harry said softly. So don't sit there and tell me that I'm the one who built the walls. You and the children laid every brick. And now you have the audacity to be surprised when I stop trying to tear them down. What do you want from me, Harry? Delilah asked, her voice suddenly tired. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we hurt you. I'm sorry that things got so out of hand. Is that what you need to hear? Harry studied her face, looking for genuine remorse, for understanding. He found neither, only impatience and a desire to smooth things over, to return to the status quo. No, he said finally, that's not what I need. What I need is, well, it doesn't matter now. It's too late. Too late for what? Delilah asked, a note of alarm creeping into her voice. Harry drained his glass and set it down. Too late for us, Delilah, too late for this family as it was. Things are changing. I'm changing. And there's nothing you can do about it. He turned to leave, but Delilah stood quickly, blocking his path. Harry, wait, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can. There's nothing to fix. Harry interrupted gently. There's only acceptance. Acceptance of what is and what will be. He sidestepped her and walked out of the room, leaving Delilah staring after him. A strange expression on her face that mingled fear, confusion, and for the first time, genuine regret. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Harry was wrapping up a board meeting. His assistant poked her head into the conference room, mouthing urgent and pointing to his phone. Harry excused himself, stepping out into the hallway. Harry Whitmore, he answered, his voice clipped. Harry, it's Bill Donovan. Harry's eyebrows rose in surprise. Bill was an old friend, someone he'd known since college. They didn't speak often these days, busy lives, different cities, but there had been a time when they were as close as brothers. Bill, Harry said, his tone warming. It's been a while. How are you? I'm good. Thanks. Listen, Harry, I'm calling because while there's something you should know, I wasn't sure if I should tell you. But after thinking about it, I figured if it were me, I'd want someone to let me know. Harry felt a heaviness settle in his stomach. What is it, Bill? I was at Celeste's wedding. Bill began, and Harry's grip on the phone tightened. I saw you weren't there, which surprised me, but I figured maybe you were sick or there was some emergency. But then I overheard something, a conversation between Delilah and one of her friends. What did she say? Harry asked, though he already suspected the answer would not be pleasant. Bill sighed. She was saying how much more relaxed everyone was without you there. How you would have tried to control everything. Take over. She said she'd convinced Celeste that it would be better if you weren't involved, that you'd only cause problems. The words hit Harry like a physical blow, even though they merely confirmed what he'd already begun to suspect. I see. Anything else? Bill hesitated. There was someone else there. A man named Thomas Barrett. Do you know him? Harry frowned, searching his memory. The name sounds vaguely familiar. He was Delilah's boyfriend before you. Her college sweetheart, I think. Harry's frown deepened. What was he doing at the wedding? That's the thing, Harry. He wasn't just a guest. He was seated at the family table. He and Delilah seemed close. Very close. Harry leaned against the wall. A cold feeling spreading through his chest. How close? I can't say for sure. Bill said carefully. But they were together most of the evening. Dancing, laughing. At one point, I saw them outside on the terrace, having what looked like a pretty intense conversation. They didn't notice me, and I didn't want to intrude. But Harry, I've known you both a long time. There was definitely something there. Harry closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Thank you for telling me, Bill. I appreciate it. Harry, I'm sorry. I debated whether to call, but I thought you deserved to know. You did the right thing, Harry assured him. And Bill, let's not wait so long to catch up next time. After ending the call, Harry stood in the hallway for a long moment, processing what he'd learned. Then, with a decisive nod, he returned to the conference room, collected his things, and excused himself in the remainder of the meeting. Something's come up, he told the board members. James will handle the rest of the agenda. He drove home in a state of numb clarity. All the pieces were falling into place. Now, Delilah's insistence that he not attend the wedding, her defensiveness afterward, her recent attempts to repair things between them. It wasn't guilt over excluding him. It was fear of what he might discover. The house was empty when he arrived, which was just as well. Harry needed time to think to plan his next move. He went to his study, closing the door behind him, and sat at his desk, staring at the family photo that still held a place of honor there. Picking up the frame, he studied the faces: Delilah's practiced smile, Celeste's youthful confidence, Paxton's rebellious smirk, his own face, proud and oblivious. A perfect picture of a family that had never really existed. With a sudden surge of anger, Harry hurled the frame across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crash, glass shattering and scattering across the hardwood floor. In the silence that followed, Harry felt a strange sense of peace descend over him. The last thread of hope, the final barrier holding back his resolve, had snapped. There is no going back now. That he picked up his phone and dialed Randall Stokes' number. Randall, he said when the lawyer answered, I'd like to accelerate our plans. All of them. I see, Randall replied, his voice carefully neutral, including the contingency plans we discussed, especially those Harry confirmed. How quickly can we move? For the will and trust changes, we can finalize everything by the end of the week. The other matters, those might take a bit longer. There are certain procedures we need to follow to ensure everything is done properly. Do what you need to do, Harry said, but I want to move as quickly as possible. Understood. I'll call you tomorrow with a more detailed timeline. After hanging up, Harry unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a folder one he'd been compiling for the past few weeks. It contained bank statements, credit card bills, phone records, small discrepancies, unexplained absences, strange charges, nothing definitive on its own. But taken together, they painted a picture of deception that stretched back months, possibly years. Harry had begun investigating Delilah's activities out of a vague suspicion and nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Now, with Bill's revelation, his suspicions had crystallized into certainty. Delilah had been reconnecting with her old flame, possibly carrying on an affair. It had used the wedding as an opportunity to bring him back in her life openly. And Harry's children, his own flesh and blood, had either been complicit in the deception or too self-absorbed to notice or care. Either way, the betrayal was complete. As Harry sat surrounded by evidence of his wife's duplicity, a plan began to form in his mind. A plan not just for separation or divorce, but for a reckoning. A plan to make each member of his family face the consequences of their actions, to feel the full weight of what they had done to it would require patience, precision, and a certain ruthlessness that Harry wasn't sure he possessed. But as he thought of Celeste's wedding as celebration he'd been barred from, where his wife had flaunted her relationship with another man, where his children had celebrated without a thought for their absent father, he felt something hardened inside him. Yes, he could be ruthless. For this, he could be whatever he needed to be. The sound of the front door opening interrupted his thoughts. Footsteps in the foyer, a rustling of bags, Delilah returning from wherever she'd been. Harry quickly gathered the scattered papers, returning them to the folder and locking it in his desk drawer. The broken picture frame and glass remain on the floor, a visible manifestation of a shattered family. Harry, Delilah called, "Are you home?" Harry didn't answer. Let her find him here, among the wreckage. Let her see what her betrayal had wrought. The footsteps approached, stopping outside his study door. A soft knock. "Harry, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Harry leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the door. "Come in, Delilah." The door opened, and Delilah stepped inside, her expression shifting from determination to shock as she took in the broken glass on the floor, the empty space on the wall where the family photo had hung. "What happened?" she asked, her voice faltering. Harry gestured to the mess. "Reality happened. Truth happened." Delilah's eyes narrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I know, Delilah," Harry said simply, "about Thomas Barrett, about how you've been seeing him, about how you made sure he was at the wedding while ensuring I wasn't." The color drained from Delilah's face. "Harry, I don't know what you think you know, but save it." Harry interrupted, his voice hard. "I have the evidence, bank statements, credit card charges, phone records, those mysterious weekend shopping trips to Chicago. The late-night calls when you thought I was asleep. I know everything." Delilah stared at him, her mouth working silently for a moment before she found her voice. "You've been spying on me." Harry laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "That's your response. I catch you in an affair. And you're upset that I found out." Classic Delilah. "It's not what you think," Delilah insisted, taking a step toward him. "Yes, Thomas and I have been in contact. Yes, he was at the wedding. But it's not. It wasn't what Harry pressed. Wasn't a fair, wasn't a betrayal. Wasn't a deliberate attempt to push me out of my daughter's wedding so you could play happy families with your old flame. I never meant to hurt you." Delilah said, her voice small liar. Harry said softly, "You meant exactly that. You've been trying to hurt me for years, Delilah, to diminish me, to push me aside. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. I'm out of this marriage, out of this family, out of this forest. We've been playing it for far too long." Delilah's face crumpled. "Harry, please, we can work through this. We could go to counseling. We can. There's no we anymore." Harry cut her off. "There's just you dealing with the consequences of your choices. And those consequences, Delilah, are going to be severe." "What does that mean?" Delilah asked, fear creeping into her voice. Harry smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made Delilah take a step back. "It means I'm done being the family ATM. It means I'm done turning a blind eye to your disrespect, your children's entitlement, your collective dismissal of everything I've worked for, everything I've built. It means war, Delilah. And trust me when I say you're not going to like how it ends." Delilah stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You've changed. You used to be kinder. And you used to be faithful." Harry retorted. "We've all changed, Delilah. The difference is my changes are just beginning yours. They're too little too late." With that, Harry stood, brushing past his wife and leaving her standing alone in a study surrounded by the physical evidence of their broken family. The envelope sat on Delilah's breakfast plate, thick cream paper with her name written in Harry's precise handwriting. She stared at it, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. For weeks, the tension in the house had been unbearable. Harry had been coldly polite, spending most of his time either at work or locked in a study. Delilah had made several attempts to discuss their situation, to explain about Thomas, to find some path forward. But Harry had rebuffed each overture with icy indifference. Now, looking at the envelope, Delilah knew whatever was inside would change everything. With trembling fingers, she picked it up, slid her nail under the flap, and extracted the contents. The first document was a letter from Randall Stokes' law firm informing her that Harry had filed for divorce on grounds of adultery. The second was a preliminary settlement offer that made her blood run cold. Harry wasn't offering alimony. He wasn't offering half their assets. He was offering the bare minimum required by law, plus a small stipend that would allow her to maintain a lifestyle nowhere near what she was accustomed to. The house, their home for 20 years, would be sold. The vacation properties would remain with Harry. The artwork, the antiques, most of the jewelry, all to be liquidated, with proceeds split according to a formula that heavily favored Harry. It was, in short, financial devastation dressed up as a legal document. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made Delilah look up. Harry entered the kitchen, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. "Is it?" Harry asked mildly. "I think it's rather generous considering the circumstances." "Generous?" Delilah repeated, incredulous. "You're leaving me with practically nothing." "Nothing?" Harry raised an eyebrow. You'll have more than enough to live comfortably, Delilah, not in a manner to which you've become accustomed, perhaps, but comfortably nonetheless. Besides, I'm sure Thomas will be happy to help you adjust your new circumstances. Delilah flinched at the mention of Thomas. There is nothing between Thomas and me. Not anymore. It was a mistake, a stupid, careless mistake. A mistake that went on for months. Harry pointed out, a mistake that you were careful to hide, a mistake that you used our daughter's wedding to facilitate. Those don't sound like the characteristics of a mistake, Delilah. They sound like the characteristics of a calculated decision. I was unhappy, Delilah said, wiping at the tears that had begun to fall. You were always so distant, so absorbed in your work. I felt invisible. And now you're unhappy because I'm paying too much attention, Harry observed. Ironic, isn't it? This isn't you, Delilah said, shaking her head. You're not this cruel, this vengeful. You're right, Harry agreed, setting down his coffee cup. I wasn't, but people changed, Delilah. You changed me. You and the children. You taught me a valuable lesson about loyalty, about family. And I'm simply applying what I've learned. The children had nothing to do with this, Delilah protested. Leave them out of it. The children made their choice long ago, Harry said. They chose you. They chose your values, your perspective. They dismissed me just as you did. And now they'll share in the consequences just as you will. What does that mean? Delilah asked, fear evident in her voice. It means I've made some changes to my will, my trust, my financial arrangements, Harry explained. Changes that reflect the new reality of our family dynamic. You've cut them off. Delilah realized horror dawning on her face. Not entirely, Harry corrected. They'll receive token inheritances. Just enough to remind them of what they've lost. They're your children, Harry. Are they? Harry asked softly, because they haven't acted like it. They've acted like strangers who view me as nothing more than a wallet. A distant benefactor they tolerate but don't respect. While the bank is now closed, they'll be devastated. Delilah whispered. Yes, Harry agreed. They probably will be just as I was devastated to learn that my family, the people I spent my life providing for, protecting, loving, saw me as disposable, as unnecessary, as someone whose feelings and place in the family were so insignificant that I could be excluded from my own daughter's wedding without a second thought. Delilah looked down at the divorce papers, reality sinking in. What do you want, Harry? What would it take to fix this? Harry regarded her for a long moment. There's no fixing this, Delilah. There's only moving forward separately. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. And what about you? Delilah challenged, anger beginning to replace her shock. What will you do? Live alone? Cut yourself off from everyone who cares about you. Who says I'll be alone? Harry countered. There's a whole world out there, Delilah, a world full of people who might appreciate what I have to offer, who might value loyalty and respect over status and appearances. You're making a mistake, Delilah insisted. This isn't the way to handle this. Perhaps Harry conceded, but it's my mistake to make, just as reconnecting with Thomas was yours. With that, he picked up his briefcase and moved toward the door. Delilah's voice stopped him. I'll fight this, she said. I'll get the best lawyer I can find. I'll take everything. Harry turned back. A small, cold smile on his lips. By all means, try. But before you do, you might want to read the other documents in that envelope. The ones that detail the offshore accounts, the trust, the corporate structures I've established over the past few months. The ones that explain why, legally speaking, most of our joint assets no longer exist. Delilah stared at him, stunned. You can't do that. It's illegal. It's perfectly legal, Harry corrected her. Everything has been done with the guidance of top financial and legal advisors. It's simply strategic. It's vindictive, Delilah spat. Yes, Harry agreed simply. It is. But then, so was excluding me from my daughter's wedding. So was carrying on an affair behind my back. So was turning my children against me. We all make choices, Delilah. The difference is I'm making mine with my eyes wide open. He left, then the sound of the front door closing with quiet finality. Delilah sat at the table, surrounded by legal documents that spelled the end of her marriage and the lifestyle she had taken for granted for decades. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed Celeste's number. Mom, Celeste answered, sounding concerned. What's wrong? You never called this early. Your father, Delilah said, her voice breaking. He's filed for divorce. There was a pause, then Celeste's voice stunned. What? What? He knows about Thomas, Delilah admitted. He knows everything. Oh, Mom, Celeste breathed. What are we going to do? I don't know. Delilah said, staring at the papers before her. But it's bad, Celeste. It's really bad. As Delilah filled her daughter in on the details, she couldn't shake the image of Harry's face as he'd left, not angry, not hurt, but resolved. Determined. This wasn't a temporary tantrum or a negotiating tactic. This was Harry Whitmore declaring war. And Delilah, for the first time in her marriage, was genuinely afraid of what that meant. The charity gala was in full swing. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel filled with the city's elite business leaders, politicians, socialites. Harry moved through the crowd with ease, stopping to shake hands, exchange pleasantries, accept compliments on his recent philanthropic endeavors. The Harrison Whitmore Foundation had made quite a splash in its first few months, funding entrepreneurship programs in underprivileged communities and attracting attention from both the business and nonprofit worlds. Tonight's gala was its official public launch, a coming-out party of sorts for Harry's new focus. Harry, a voice called, and he turned to see Richard Palmer, one of his oldest business associates, approaching with a glass of champagne in hand. Spectacular event. You've outdone yourself. Thank you. Richard, Harry replied, gesturing to the room. Though I can't take all the credit. The foundation team has been working around the clock to make this happen. Still, Richard said, lowering his voice. It's quite a statement, isn't it? Establishing this foundation right in the middle of everything else. Harry maintained his pleasant expression. Everything else. Richard glanced around, then leaned closer. The divorce, Harry, it's the talk of the town, especially after what came out about Delilah and that Barrett fellow. Oh, that, Harry said dismissively. Old news, Richard, life goes on. Indeed it does. Richard agreed, patting Harry's shoulder. And you seem to be doing exceptionally well. He glanced toward the entrance of the ballroom. Harry followed his gaze and felt a jolt of surprise. Delilah stood just inside the doorway, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. She was dressed impeccably, as always. But there was a fragility to her that hadn't been there before. Excuse me, Richard, Harry said, moving toward his soon-to-be-ex-wife. Yes. He approached Delilah straight in her shoulders, lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance that didn't quite hide her anxiety. Delilah, Harry greeted her, his voice neutral. This is unexpected. Is it? She asked. It's a charity event. I still get the invitations. Of course, Harry said smoothly, you're welcome to stay. Though I should warn you, the mood may not be entirely comfortable for you. Delilah's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Before Harry could respond, a woman nearby turned and noticed Delilah. Her eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed in judgment. She whispered something to her companion, who also turned to stare. That, Harry said quietly, news travels fast in these circles, Delilah. And it seems the story of our divorce and its causes has traveled faster than most. Delilah paled slightly. You told people about Thomas. I didn't have to, Harry replied. Someone at the wedding took photos of the two of you together. Someone else remembered your history. Put those together with my filing for divorce. And well, people draw their own conclusions. You could have stopped it, Delilah accused. You could have kept it private. I could have, Harry agreed. But why would I? You weren't concerned about my privacy or dignity when you excluded me from Celeste's wedding. Why should I extend courtesies you never thought to offer me? This is revenge. Delilah said, her voice low but intense, pure and simple. Not revenge. Harry corrected, consequences. You made choices, Delilah. Now you're living with them. It's not just me who's suffering, Delilah hissed. Have you thought about what this is doing to the children, to their reputations? Yes, the children, Harry said, his tone hardening. How are they still recovering from the shock of discovering that their trust funds have been redirected to charity, that the inheritance they've been counting on no longer exists? They're devastated. Delilah said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice, especially Celeste. Her in-laws are not happy about the change in her financial situation. No, I imagine they're not, Harry said. The Jenkinses have always been obsessed with status and money. One wonders if they would have been so eager for the match had they known Celeste wouldn't be bringing a substantial dowry to the marriage. Adrian loves her, Delilah protested. It's not about money. If you believe that, you're more naive than I thought, Harry said. But it doesn't matter. Celeste made her choice. She prioritized her relationship with the Jenkinses over her relationship with me. She can live with the consequences. In Paxton, Delilah challenged. What has he done to deserve being cut off? He's drowning in debt. Harry. He's had to sell his car, move out of his apartment. Paxton has been living beyond his means for years, Harry pointed out. Taking money from me while treating me with contempt, perhaps some financial hardship will teach him the value of work, of earning what you have instead of simply expecting it to be handed to you. You become cruel, Delilah said, shaking her head. I hardly recognize you anymore. Strange, Harry remarked. I was just thinking the same about you. The Delilah I married would never have betrayed her husband, never have conspired to exclude him from his daughter's wedding, never have turned his children against him. Yet here we are. Before Delilah could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Margaret, Harry's assistant. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Whitmore, Margaret said, casting a wary glance at Delilah. But it's time for your speech. Thank you, Margaret, Harry said. To Delilah, if you'll excuse me, duty calls. Harry moved toward the stage, aware of the eyes following him, the whispers trailing in his wake. As he took his place at the podium and gazed out at the assembled crowd, the movers and shakers of the city, many of whom had been acquaintances for decades, he felt a strange sense of liberation. For years he had cared what these people thought. He had worked to maintain a certain image of a reputation. Now, with his marriage in tatters and his relationship with his children severed, that image had been shattered. And yet, looking out at the faces turned toward him, Harry realized that his standing had not diminished. If anything, it had grown. The divorce, the betrayal, the cutting off of his entitled children, all of it had transformed him in the eyes of his peers. No longer just a successful businessman, but a man of principle, of backbone. A man who wouldn't be taken advantage of, who stood up for himself when wronged. Good evening, Harry began, his voice strong and clear. Thank you all for coming tonight to support the Harrison Whitmore Foundation. Many of you have asked why I chose to establish this foundation now at this point in my life. The answer is simple: legacy. He paused, his gaze finding Delilah in the crowd, standing alone near the back of the room. We all reach a point where we must consider what we're leaving behind. What mark we'll make on the world for too long. I believe my legacy was secure in the hands of my family. I was wrong. True legacy isn't about passing on wealth to those who happen to share your DNA. It's about creating lasting change, about giving opportunities to those who will appreciate them, who will make the most of them. A murmur ran through the crowd. Harry continued, his voice gaining strength. The Harrison Whitmore Foundation will provide scholarships, mentorship, and seed funding to young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. People who understand the value of hard work, of perseverance. People who don't expect success to be handed to them, but are willing to fight for it. He looked directly at Delilah now, his gaze unwavering. In recent months, I've learned some difficult lessons about trust, about loyalty, about what truly matters in life. These lessons have been painful but necessary. They've shown me that the only legacy worth leaving is one built on solid foundations, not of obligation or blood, but of shared values and mutual respect. By the time Harry finished his speech, Delilah was gone, but her departure hadn't gone unnoticed. As Harry mingled with guests afterward, he overheard snippets of conversation. Can you believe she had the nerve to show up? After what she did to him, and now the children are struggling, turns out they're not such hot commodities without daddy's money. Did you hear about the son working as a bartender now? Imagine, and the daughter's marriage is already on the rocks. The Jenkins boy married beneath himself, after all. The rumors, the gossip, the social fallout, it was all unfolding exactly as Harry had anticipated. The Whitmore family, once respected and envied, was now the subject of whispers and judgment. Delilah, once a fixture on charity boards and social committees, was finding herself increasingly isolated. Celeste, whose wedding had been the social event of the season, was now watching her in-laws distance themselves, their enthusiasm for the match cooling as it became clear that the Whitmore fortune would not be flowing in their direction. And Paxton, who had coasted on his father's name and wealth for years, was suddenly facing the harsh reality of having to support himself. It was, Harry had to admit, deeply satisfying to watch, not out of a desire to see them suffer, or at least not entirely, but out of a sense of justice being served. They had taken him for granted, dismissed his feelings, excluded him from their lives, except when they needed his money or his name. Now they were learning too late the true value of what they had discarded. As the gala wound down, Harry found himself standing on the hotel's terrace looking out at the city lights. A familiar voice spoke from behind him. Quite an evening, Harry, He turned to see Randall Stokes, drink in hand, regarding him with a mixture of admiration and concern. Indeed, it was Harry agreed. The foundation raised more than we expected. That's not what I meant, Randall said, moving to stand beside him at the railing. I meant the whole performance, the speech, the not-so-subtle digs of your family, the way you've positioned yourself as the wrong party in all this. Aren't I the wrong party? Harry asked mildly. Perhaps Randall conceded. But Harry, I've known you for a long time. This orchestrated public humiliation is not like you. The Harry you knew is gone, Harry said quietly, replaced by someone who finally sees things clearly. And his clarity worth the cost? Randall asked. The relationships that can never be repaired. The bridges being burned. Harry was silent for a moment, considering the question. Some bridges need to be burned, Randall. Some relationships aren't worth repairing. My family made their choice long ago. They chose to exclude me, to use me, to betray me. Now, they're facing the consequences of that choice. And when it's over, Randall pressed. When the dust settles and the divorce is final and your family is thoroughly punished. What then? Harry turned to look at his old friend. Then I start over, free from the weight of expectations I've never been able to meet from a family that never truly valued me. Free to build something new, something better. Randall nodded slowly. I hope you find what you're looking for, Harry. I really do. As Randall walked away, Harry turned back to the city view, reflecting on his words. Was this revenge worth the cost? With these burned bridges, once he might someday regret destroying, perhaps. But as he thought of the years of dismissal, of being the outsider in his own family, of the final betrayal of being excluded from his daughter's wedding while his wife rekindled an old flame, Harry found it hard to imagine a future where reconciliation was possible. Some wounds were too deep to heal. Some betrayals too profound to forgive. And Harry Whitmore, the new Harry Whitmore, the one who had emerged from the ashes of his family's betrayal, was not inclined to try. 6 months had passed since the gala. Fall had given way to winter, winter to spring. And now the city was in full bloom, trees lining the streets laden with fresh green leaves and fragrant blossoms. Harry stood in his new penthouse, gazing out at the view of the park below. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. The house sold. The proceeds divided according to the terms Harry's lawyers had negotiated. Delilah had fought, hiring one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the city. But in the end, she'd had to settle for far less than she'd expected. Tonight was special. Harry was hosting a party, a housewarming of sorts, though that term seemed inadequate for the gathering he had planned. It was in many ways a celebration of his new life, his new beginning, a statement to the world, and to himself that he had moved on. The penthouse was already filled with flowers, catering staff bustling about, setting up for the evening's festivities. Harry had invited a carefully curated guest list: business associates, friends, members of the foundation's board, and a few select new acquaintances he'd made in recent months. Notably absent from the invitation list were Delilah, Celeste, and Paxton. The doorbell rang, and Harry glanced at his watch. Too early for guests. His assistant, Margaret, who had been helping with the arrangements, moved to answer it. Mr. Whitmore, she called a moment later, her voice strained. You have visitors. Harry turned, already knowing who it would be before he saw them. Delilah stood in the entryway, flanked by Celeste and Paxton. All three looked uncomfortable, out of place in the sleek modernity of Harry's new home. Quite a place you've got here, Dad. Paxton said, his attempt at casual undermined by the tension in his voice. Thank you, Harry replied coolly, though I don't recall inviting any of you. We need to talk, Delilah said, stepping forward. All of us as a family. Harry raised an eyebrow. A family? Is that what we are? I was under the impression we were strangers who happened to share some DNA and a last name. Please, Dad, Celeste interjected, her voice soft. Just hear us out. Harry considered them for a moment, then nodded to Margaret. Give us a few minutes, would you, Margaret? And perhaps you could ensure the caterers stay in the kitchen for now. Of course, Mr. Whitmore, Margaret replied, disappearing down a hallway. Harry gestured to the living area. Well, since you've come all this way, you might as well sit down. They moved to the arrangement of sleek leather sofas and chairs. Harry taking a seat, facing the three of them. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and laden with unspoken words. So, Harry said, finally, talk. Delilah glanced at the children, then back to Harry. We've been doing a lot of thinking, all of us, about what happened, about the choices we made. And Harry prompted when she paused. And we were wrong, Delilah admitted, the words clearly difficult for her. I was wrong about Thomas, about the wedding, about a lot of things. I see, Harry said, his expression neutral. And what brought about this sudden realization? The loss of your social standing, the hit to your finances? Or perhaps it's the fact that Celeste's marriage is already showing signs of strain from what I hear. Celeste flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? Harry asked, turning his gaze to his daughter. Tell me, Celeste, how are the Jenkinses these days? Still as welcoming as they were when they thought you were bringing a substantial inheritance to the marriage. Adrian and I are having problems, Celeste admitted, her voice small. His parents, they've been putting pressure on him, suggesting that perhaps we rushed into things. How surprising, Harry remarked dryly, and you, Paxton, how's life treating you? Paxton shifted uncomfortably. It's been an adjustment, working regular hours, paying bills, all that. I imagine it has, Harry said. Quite different from living off your trust fund. Isn't it? We didn't come here to be mocked. Harry, Delilah interjected, a flash of her old spirit showing through. We came because despite everything, we're still family. And family should be together. Harry laughed. A short, incredulous sound. Family should be together? Where was that sentiment when you were planning Celeste's wedding? When you were reconnecting with Thomas behind my back? When you were all deciding that I was an inconvenience to be tolerated rather than a husband and father to be respected? We made mistakes, Celeste said, tears welling in her eyes. Terrible mistakes. But Dad, we're trying to make amends. To fix what we broke. Some things can't be fixed, Harry said quietly. Some bridges once burned, stay ash. So that's it. Paxton asked, a note of anger entering his voice. You're just done with us? Writing off 30 years of marriage, your own children. Like they mean nothing to you. I'm not the one who wrote off this family. Harry corrected him. You all did that long ago. I'm simply finally acknowledging what has been true for years, that I was never truly part of this family. Not in the ways that mattered. That's not true. Delilah protested. You were just distant, absorbed in your work. We needed you. And you weren't there. I was always there. Harry countered, his voice firm, working to provide the lifestyle you took for granted, supporting every ambition, every whim, every desire the three of you ever expressed. I was there for every moment that mattered, or I tried to be when I wasn't deliberately excluded or misinformed. We didn't come here to argue. Harry, Delilah said, her tone conciliatory. We came to try to mend fences, to see if there's any chance of salvaging something from the wreckage. Harry studied her face, then Celeste's, then Paxton's. He saw regret there, genuine regret. But he also saw something else, calculation, the recognition that their lives were harder without him, without his money, his connections, his support. They missed what he provided. Not who he was. Why now? He asked suddenly. Why, after 6 months of silence, do you appear on my doorstep hours before a party looking for reconciliation? The three exchanged glances, and Harry knew he'd hit upon something. We heard about the party, Celeste admitted reluctantly, about your new friends. We thought, we worried that I was moving on. Harry finished for her, that I was building a new life, one that doesn't include you. Well, you're right. I am. You don't mean that, Delilah said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. I do, Harry replied simply. I've spent decades trying to earn your respect, your appreciation, your love. I've finally accepted that it's not possible. Not because of any failing on my part, but because you're incapable of seeing me as anything more than a provider of bank account with legs. That's not true, Celeste protested, tears now flowing freely. We love you, Dad. We've always loved you. Perhaps, Harry conceded, in your way, but not enough to stand up for me when it mattered. Not enough to include me in the most important day of your life. Not enough to be faithful, to be honest, to be respectful. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. I have guests arriving soon and preparations to oversee. I think it's time for you to leave. Harry, please, Delilah began, also rising. Can't we just know? Harry interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. We can't. You're overreacting. It's just a family. The words, a deliberate echo of what they had said to him about the wedding, landed with precision. All three flinched as if struck. That Paxton tried one last time. Don't do this. Don't throw away everything we could still be. Harry looked at his son, seeing for a moment the little boy who had once looked up to him with admiration. I'm not throwing anything away, Paxton. I'm simply acknowledging what already is. Go live your lives. Learn from this if you can. Become better people. Do it without me. He walked to the entryway, opening the door in a clear invitation for them to leave. One by one, they filed past him, Delilah with a final pleading look, Celeste with tears streaming down her face. Paxton with anger and hurt battling in his expression as the door closed behind them. Harry leaned against it for a moment, exhaling slowly. There was pain. Yes, how could there not be? But there was also an overwhelming sense of peace, of finality. The chapter was closed. The last invitation had been rejected. Hours later, the penthouse was filled with laughter, conversation, music. Harry moved among his guests, accepting compliments on his new home, discussing the Foundation's latest initiatives, enjoying the easy camaraderie of people who valued him for himself. Not for what he could provide. As the evening wound down, he found himself on the terrace, gazing out at the city lights, a glass of champagne in hand. A voice spoke from behind him, "Penny for your thoughts." Harry turned to see Diane Fletcher, a board member of his foundation, and a woman he'd come to admire for her intelligence, her wit, and her direct manner. "I'm not sure they're worth that much," Harry replied with a small smile. "I doubt that," Diane said, moving to stand beside him. "You've been preoccupied all evening. The perfect host, but somehow elsewhere." Harry considered denying it, but found he didn't want to. "I had some unexpected visitors before the party. My former family," Diane said, understanding immediately. "That would explain it." "Difficult?" "Yes and no," Harry admitted. It was final. A closing of doors that perhaps needed to be closed. "How do you feel about that?" Diane asked, her gaze direct and compassionate. Harry thought about it, turning the question over in his mind. "Lighter," he said finally, "as if I've set down a burden I've been carrying for too long. Sad in some ways, but mostly free." Diane nodded, not offering platitudes or judgments, just acceptance. It was one of the things Harry had come to appreciate about her. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. Harry clinked his glass against hers. To new beginnings. As they stood there, looking out at the city spread before them, Harry felt a sense of possibility unfurling within him. The past was behind him now, with all its disappointments and betrayals. Ahead lay a future of his own making, populated by people who saw him clearly and valued him genuinely. It wasn't the life he had planned, the future he had worked toward for decades. But as he glanced at Diane, catching her warm smile, he thought perhaps it might be better. Different, certainly. Unexpected, absolutely. But better in ways he was only beginning to understand. The last invitation had been given and refused. Now was time to write a new story. One that began with Harry Whitmore, standing alone, but not lonely. Ready at last to embrace a life defined not by what he had lost, but by what he had found.